Welcome to Corporate Warrior, the podcast that brings you the best advice on how to improve your health, optimize performance, and maximize productivity. With your host, Lawrence Neal.
So, James Fisher, you have a degree in sports science and a master's in exercise physiology, and you're currently studying for a PhD that sounds like it's already really been attained in a non-official sense. You've worked with the Lawn Tennis Association, Great Britain's goalball players, Great Britain's wheelchair basketball players, and international track and field athletes, and many more. You've also published a lot of exercise studies, and I've noticed that one may have appeared in Men's Health, or I don't know if I saw FHM. Was it Men's Health or FHM? Have I got that completely wrong?
There's a couple that got picked up by some mainstream media. One got picked up by Men's Health, I think, and another one. One of the bodybuilding magazines seemed to run with it, Muscular Development. So yeah,
awesome.
a few of them made sort of mainstream media, which is nice.
That is awesome, and that must be great for you. Have you got a lot of people contact you directly as a result of that?
Yeah, I get a pretty good response. Probably the biggest response is from our 2011 evidence-based resistance training recommendations paper.
Okay.
Which I still get kind of emails from random people from anywhere from Iran, Australia, US, Canada, all over the UK, sort of saying, oh, this follows what I've been doing for a while. So it's really great to see that there's some evidence for it. And I'm really glad that we went in an open access journal with that so that anybody could read it. It wasn't just restricted to people with access to certain journals. So
yeah, that's awesome. I really appreciate that because it'd suck if you couldn't get access to some of these publications. But it's interesting you say that a lot of people have obviously believed in this type of training, and I'm assuming you refer to high intensity training for a while. But then there wasn't necessarily the research done to kind of prove that it was effective or most efficient or whatever. And then I mean, I think it was Don McGuff that said actually that often you innovate after you find something out after you've actually been doing it for a while. So you don't actually discover it and then start doing it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, completely. Yeah. In fact, before we even get into that, I'm gonna pause for a second on the term of high intensity training.
Sure.
Because I think that this is this was sort of coined back by Arthur Jones back in the day, and has been regurgitated since. And myself and James Seal have published papers just discussing the term intensity. And even high intensity training for most people who are new to exercise probably means interval training. And in fact, I'm not a big fan of the term high intensity training because I think it limits what this exercise modality is all about. And it's got a bit of a click behind it. There are too many people who sort of are attached to it because of the history rather than because of the efficacy of it.
So true, yeah.
So I think that, I just generally refer to it as logical, scientific, evidence-based, however you want to call it, resistance training. But yeah, I think that, I was pretty similar, it all came to me the same sort of way. During my undergrad degree, I studied under Dr. Dave Smith, who I've since published papers with. And he sort of drew my attention to a couple of pieces by L. Darden and Arthur Jones, sort of older pieces. And it seemed to make sense with what I was currently experiencing with not having enough time to spend as much time in the gym. And it turned out that, I was decreasing from an hour and a half to 2 hours every other day to, 30 or 40 minutes 3 or 4 times a week or 2 or 3 times a week and still making progress. And it seemed logical that actually it's not about the volume or the frequency. It's more about the intensity of effort that's being applied. So.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point, and I think that's great that you don't. James Steele said a very similar thing, and you obviously mentioned it there that high intensity training is so ambiguous. It's better to refer to it in, I guess, a more a clearer way, perhaps. You mentioned there the evidence-based resistance training recommendations paper that you wrote. I haven't read the whole thing through, I'm ashamed to say, probably because it was a bit intimidating. But I did read the abstract. And in the abstract, you said you recommend a single set of 8 to 12 repetitions, which is interesting to me. Does that not vary dependent on the cadence or other, or is this is probably explored in the body of the study, isn't it? But why 8 to 12 repetitions exactly?
You raise a really good point, actually, and if I'm honest, the bulk of the literature didn't necessarily support a specific repetition range or a time under tension, and at that point, we opted to go with a more pragmatic approach, and in fact, the evidence we used to support the 8 to 12 repetitions was that you need to use a reasonable load to acquire the health benefits as far as bone mineral density. Which sort of is suggested to be around about 80% of one repetition max. I'm not an expert on the area of bone mineral density and resistance training, so anybody listening to this who's able to cite other evidence, please get in touch. But we felt like this was quite a pragmatic approach. If you're training with a load of around 80% of one repetition max, your muscles are under tension for around 60 to 90 seconds. Whether that means that you do 1 or 2 reps very slow, or you do 8 to 12 reps at a bit quicker repetition duration, then that's down to the experience. And one of the key things that we do talk about in that paper is that people should kind of record their own training, keep a training journal or a training log, so that they can go back and look at what worked well for them and try manipulating the different variables, whether it's load or repetition duration or frequency or volume, to find out what best suits them. Probably the biggest thing that I wanted to get across from the evidence-based paper was that, we're not all the guys reading Men's Health or FHM or whatever else gives exercise recommendations of 3 sets of 12 reps, at such and such a load, and different people will experience different adaptations based on manipulation of those variables.
Yeah, you raised some really interesting points there. I recently went for a coffee with Simon Shawcross, and I had a major epiphany. So I started doing Doug's Big Five from Body by Science, and I had, after a few times, kind of so I progressed quite well on that, but after a while I felt like I plateaued, and my time under load wasn't improving, and I was tracking my variables and it didn't seem to improve. So over time, I then progressed to a 2-way split and then a 3-way split. And I explained this to Simon, and Simon was like, well, how do you know that you haven't improved? And I was like, well, I could see the numbers weren't improving. He's like, yeah, but how do you know that your form, that your breathing, your cadence, everything was perfect every time? And then not to mention all the other variables such as sleep, diet, etc., stress. And I was like, oh no, I suppose I couldn't, I couldn't keep those as a constant. I couldn't control those variables. And then he made me realize that actually I'd have probably been better off continuing to do the Big Five for a bit longer, because only a true snapshot would have been to compare weeks 1 and perhaps week 10, rather than look at week on week. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And you raise a really good point. And it's one of the reasons why I like to refer to it as resistance training, not strength training. Strength implies that the main adaptation is strength, whereas resistance training implies or leaves anybody using the term open to any of the other fantastic adaptations that you can get from resistance training. And I think that our sleep patterns, our bone mineral density, for example, as we said, our body composition, it's not just our strength or our time under load or our load that we're lifting that we want to see adapt. We want all the health adaptations that we can get as well. And I think Simon's a very, very clever guy, and I think he raises a really good point. He's a very, very good trainer. I've been fortunate enough to be put through a bit parts of a workout with him, and he's a great guy and raises some really good points there. I think that we do look at the most obvious variables, and if we're not getting stronger or we're not able to lift the weight for longer, we then want to manipulate something, and maybe we are a bit premature in doing that. So
yeah, no, he is really clever actually. I was not that he didn't convey that in his online presence, but I was certainly impressed when I was talking to him. I learned a lot from that conversation. Right, in one of your other studies you produced, the meta-analysis, is multiple set training really better than single set training for muscular hypertrophy? which I came to know about from Drew Bay, and he was really into that study. You said there was insufficient evidence to prove that multiple set training is more effective than single set training for muscular hypertrophy. I would be interested, what is your personal view on what is the most effective protocol for hypertrophy?
Yeah, this is the big debate, isn't it? People want, most guys want bigger muscle, so how do you get that?
Exactly.
I think, it's been my lifelong question since I was about 16, and I'm not afraid to admit it. I think that, first off, to discuss that paper briefly, if I may.
Go for it.
James Krieger, who is a very bright guy, and it wasn't to take anything away from his capabilities, but he's an exceptional statistician from what I can gather, and he ran a meta-analysis which included eight studies which considered volume of training between single and multiple sets. And the problem with a meta-analysis is you're trying to combine a lot of data points to come out with a single data point, and it's not that it's a bad thing. If it, the potential is that the studies that were included were undersized, so they didn't have enough participants to show a statistically significant difference. And if that's the case, and it's truly the case, then a meta-analysis will be able to compile all that data so it looks like one big study with enough participants to show significant differences. But the problem with resistance training is it's a lot more complicated than just that one variable of hypertrophy. And there were a lot of other variables included within that study, whether it's the age of the participant or their training experience or their frequency of training or the exercises they were doing or single and multi-joint exercises and so on. And Krieger's conclusions were that there was I think it was a 0.34 effect size for multiple sets and a 0.24 or a 0.26 or something like that effect size for single sets. And from that, his next sentence was that there's 40% greater adaptations from multiple sets. And when you look at it from that point of view, that small an effect size is really not really 40% greater gains. Not in the truest sense of the word, not in a practical sense. So I kind of went back through the studies and published that, beware there are meta-analyses. And really what I was highlighting was that multiple sets might be better, but this doesn't prove it. Mm-hmm. Now, I think that, I've just finished some research with a student of mine who is looking at 5x5 training, which dates back to sort of the 1970s when it was first mentioned. And he's compared a group doing a set to failure against a group doing 5x5 training, 5 sets of 5 repetitions with a 2-minute rest between. Mm-hmm. But one of the things that we were pretty hot on looking at was the exertion, rate of perceived exertion. So the group that were training to failure, reached an RPE of 20, which is maximal exertion, on the first set because they went to muscular failure. But the other group also reached an RPE of 20, albeit in the 5th set. So they both kind of went to the same intensity of effort, but one group did it in 1 set and one group did it in 5. And they both made pretty similar adaptations. Now, this was only in strength. We didn't measure hypertrophy in this research. But it seems logical that, what you're trying to do is recruit muscle fibers to stimulate an adaptation, to catalyze an adaptation. If you recruit all the muscle fibers in 1 set to grow or to get stronger and to adapt, then that seems as logical as if you recruit them over 5 sets. Especially if the 5 sets were all relatively submaximal. So it took 5 sets to recruit them. I think that the key thing really is that if once you're recruiting all the muscle fibers, you're doing as much as you can to make them grow. Re-recruiting them doesn't seem to do any more. So I think that from that point of view, some people, I've trained people and I know from personal experience, friends of mine who really struggle training to really true muscular failure. So they opt to do multiple sets. They still do 2 or 3 sets. And, while I can look at that some days and that's a complete waste of time, I look at it on the other hand and respect their commitment to trying to recruit all their muscle fibers. Mm. If they're going to put themselves through it for 3 sets and train for 3 times as long, then go for it.
Yeah, interesting. That is interesting. So do you, at this current time, do you have a maybe it's not backed up by any scientific proof, but do you have a view on what is the most effective protocol for hypertrophy?
I think that the evidence seems to suggest that muscular tension is key. So I would probably limit explosive movements and maintain muscular tension. I don't necessarily preach very slow repetitions. I think as long as the muscles and the tension, that's fine. A single set to muscular failure seems adequate. And I would probably encourage most people to do probably at least a couple of exercises per muscle group, just to make sure that the muscle fibers are recruited maximally. But I don't think that. I think that there's a lot more really big studies need to be done to compare single and multi-joints and persons using both single and multi-joint and frequency and volume and things like that.
Do those sorts of studies require a lot of resource and money? And I mean, are they really challenging to do?
Yeah, they are. They really are. I mean, most resistance training studies have looked at untrained participants, simply because if somebody doesn't do any exercise, then they're going to make adaptations relatively quickly. And most people have a finite time in which to turn out a resistance training study. So some of the longer studies are 12 weeks. If you go to trained participants, then of course their previous training experience is going to be key. So for example, if I took you into one of my studies, then what you've been doing up till now will affect the adaptations you make within my research. So if you're doing Big 5, and that's what you've done for X months, then if I suddenly change the frequency of that or the volume of that in any way, then it could hinder your progress or it could assist your progress. And if I put you in the same group as somebody who's been training once a week compared to 3 times a week, or been, not been doing a Big 5 workout, they've been doing their, men's health beach workout, then technically you're both considered trained. So really what these studies need to look at is very long term, taking people and putting them through a workout for probably 20 weeks. And at that point, then they're trained, and then they can be divided into groups, and we can look at how variables change. So
it's complex, isn't it?
It's complex. It's time consuming. It's a lot of energy. It's fundamentally it comes down to money. And then you've got, of course, the big problem is dropout. If people haven't trained previously, they maybe don't want to train. There's probably a reason why they haven't trained. And if people do train, then they're not going to change their whole workout just to fit in with some scientists' research. So
yeah. What are you able to reveal any sort of studies that you're working on at the moment?
We've always got things in progress. I work really closely with some guys over in the US, a guy called Luke Carlson, who's based at Discover Strength.
He's on, I think, on Wednesday. I have to check the diary, but he's on the podcast soon.
Fantastic. That should be really good. Luke's a great guy, and again, a really knowledgeable trainer. He runs a conference over in the US, which was previously called the Hip Resurgence. Yeah. And this year is the Rex conference. And we've been doing some research with him. He was one of the co-authors on the pre-exhaustion study, and we base a lot of the research out there where we've got trained participants, and he's been doing some research with looking at breakdown sets or drop sets. So we're looking at this advanced techniques and seeing if there are any greater adaptations from that. So,
awesome.
Yeah, there's always a couple of things on the go, a couple of things in the pipeline. So. Yeah, I mean, my interests in exercise are quite broad, so I've got some data from an exercise motivations inventory as well, which is comparing groups doing things like CrossFit or group exercise to people who train on their own or to people who train with a personal trainer.
Oh, that sounds interesting. Can you share any things that you found from those comparisons?
I actually can't because I haven't run the data analysis yet. So I know, yeah. It's the exercise motivations inventory, or the EMI2, is a really interesting sort of 51 question questionnaire, 51 item or multi-item questionnaire that looks at things like competitiveness, health, physical appearance and things like that, motivations that people might exercise. And one of the reasons we looked at it is, again, a student of mine, a very, very clever student, wanted to look at this area because she felt that people who do CrossFit and that kind of exercise probably have a more competitive element. than people who maybe have a one-on-one personal trainer, one-on-one personal training sessions, who might be training more for aesthetics or for health reasons and things like that. So as soon as the data's out, I'll get in touch, Lawrence, and we'll get it on your site, and then it'll get published.
Awesome. Yeah, no, that'd be great, and that's really interesting to me. Because I guess, I'm assuming you're familiar with the Hawthorne Effect, and perhaps that plays a part in all of this. Yeah,
absolutely. The psychology of resistance training is just a whole other area, and I laugh with a lot of my peers that I'm a psychologist stuck in a physiologist's body.
No, that's so true. It's I even just myself, someone who is really quite passionate about health and fitness, but is more of a layman compared to you. It just amazes me how, I can read something like Body by Science and then feel like I have a good grasp on, strength adaptations and how to sort of trigger those. And then I can read, good calories, bad calories, and feel like I understand nutrition. But then when you get into these, you realize there's like all these subtexts like stretching and biomechanics, and then there's a whole nother rabbit hole to go down, and it's very overwhelming. So yeah, we rely on people like you to interpret the data and make it easy for us to understand, I suppose.
Yeah, it's such a fascinating area, and you've got some great guys that you mentioned there, Gary Taubes and Bill DeSimone, and these are, there's some great reading out there for people to do, and it blows my mind that more people aren't interested in their own health and well-being and read this kind of book. But it's like you said, there's always another rabbit hole. There's a spin-off from that you can go to. So.
Yeah. No, absolutely. All right, I'm going to ask you some questions. They're all obviously around health, fitness, and nutrition, and they're kind of in a weird order. But let's just see how that goes. I'm interested in understanding muscular sort of decondition. So once you've done let's take myself for instance, someone who's done high intensity training, for want of a better term at this time, for a couple of years. If I now don't train, how long is there a kind of an average time that it takes for muscle and strength to decline following that session in your experience?
We published evidence-based resistance training for muscular hypertrophy a couple of years back, and I think in that we cite that there's normally a 3-week period before there's significant loss in hypertrophy, or some of the studies seem to show that. I think that the big thing is people become quite addicted to the exercise routines that they're doing, and they almost put a bit of pressure on themselves to maintain a routine. And I think that by what I've read, not by my own experience or my own studies, but by what I've read in the literature, it takes some reasonable time to lose the adaptations that most people have made. Obviously, that will be completely independent to different people. Some people will be able to maintain adaptations over a lot longer time than others. I read somewhere years back, it may have been an Arthur Jones or an L. Darden text, that sort of suggested that the longer it takes to build muscle, the longer it takes to lose it as well.
Interesting.
So I can't even recall what their rationale for that comment was. I think at the time it might have been something about trying to set people against steroid use. That if steroids are a quick fix and you build muscles quick, then you'll lose them quick. But I can't recall exactly where it came from. But I think that's a really interesting area, and again, a lot more research needs to be done in that. So
interesting. If there's a deterrent for using steroids, that's a good one. Yeah, no, I can see maybe there's perhaps some truth in that. I'm certainly quite ectomorphic and slow to build muscle. And I've noticed that if I do stop training for I normally don't go about probably longer than sort of 2 weeks, 2.5 weeks, but I don't see any losses. I come back stronger, if anything. Yeah, which is really interesting. Are you familiar with Tim Ferriss's 4-Hour Body?
I am indeed.
Okay. Yeah. What do you think?
I read 4-Hour Body, I read 4-Hour Work Week, and I contemplated getting 4-Hour Chef. I think it's 4 Hour Chef, the latest one.
Yeah, I've got them all. Yep.
And I thought 4 Hour Body was pretty good. It's an interesting sort of approach to things, and 4 Hour Work Week was a really nice approach to kind of lifestyle for people who are busy and, you know, corporate people maybe, or people who can make their life more efficient.
Absolutely.
4 Hour Body with as a general guide towards nutrition and towards exercise was pretty good. I think they cited the Smith and Bruslow paper in that one about the Arthur Jones's recommendations. So, yeah.
What did you think about the Geek to Freak experiment?
Off the top of my head, I don't recall it actually.
So this was where, yeah, sure. So this is where Tim Ferriss gained 34 pounds of muscle in 28 days. Granted, he had withered down to, I think, 2 stone less than his normal weight from, you know, just lack of strength training, and I imagine caloric restriction when he was doing tango lessons in Argentina. And then he is claimed to replicate the experiment. So this is, you know, two training sessions a week with 2 compound exercises performed in a HIIT fashion, with an enormous caloric consumption for, you know, during the program. And he's claimed to have got, I think it's in the hundreds of people that have even outdone him in terms of gaining, you know, awesome gains in a very short amount of time. What do you think about that?
Wow, that's fantastic, isn't it? You know, I think if you're in a detrained condition, I mean, if we look back to Casey Viator and the Colorado experiment, which I guess was probably what Tim Ferriss was looking at, if I recall. You know, Casey Viator at the time was coming back off losing a finger in an industry accident, I think.
Yeah, that's true.
And then sort of got back into training and improved his nutrition and so on, and sort of lost body fat and put on just an inordinate amount of muscle in about 21 days or so. And I think, you know, there's obviously people who have the genetic potential to do this. And Tim Ferriss, you know, if all of that's true, and I'm not suggesting for a second it's not, I think that there's a lot of people who would look at that and doubt it. But I think that if that's true, then, you know, he's obviously got training right, he's got lifestyle right, he's got his sleep patterns right, and his nutrition's been accurate, and there may be some leeway in the methods of measurements taken for body composition. You know, most methods of body composition are give or take 4%. So if you put on an extra few pounds of fat and they weren't picked up by a bod pod or by however body composition was measured, he would have got away with looking like he'd added an extra couple of pounds of muscle there as well.
Interesting.
If you are using creatine or anything like that, then there's a potential to retain water, which, you know, which could kind of skew the data a little bit as well. I think that that's pretty optimistic to think that most people could come anywhere close to that. I think that at the same time, as you said, people have got in touch with Tim Ferriss and sort of said they made even greater adaptations. And I think that there's still a lot we don't know about adaptation and hormones. And there's still a big debate raging on about the hormone hypothesis, about whether testosterone and growth factor and IGF is a really kind of key in kind of muscle growth and cortisol and things like that. And these are not my areas of expertise, so please don't go down this lane. It's just another rabbit hole to look down. But you know, I think that's probably potential. I weigh probably right now around 14 stone. If I was detrained down to about 12 stone, and that was muscle that I lost, then I would probably expect to be able to pack it back on pretty quick.
Sure.
I used to play basketball, and I used to drop weight during the basketball season because I just didn't have enough time to do strength training, and I found with all the basketball training I did, I would just tend to not be able to take in enough calories through the day.
Wow.
And come the end of the basketball season, I would pretty much quit training, you know, 5 times a week or 6 times a week, and get back to lifting weights properly, and, you know, keep sort of 5,000 calories a day, and I'd put weight back on very, very quickly. So I found, I can imagine that, you know, it's quite possible to do what
Right, so you were saying about during the basketball season, about how you dropped and gained weight. I can't remember exactly where you got up to now. Don't know if you remember.
Yeah, I was just sort of saying that at the end of the season, I could put the weight back on pretty quick, and see my strength go up pretty well, and my sort of muscular size go up again pretty quickly. So I'm sure that if somebody's in a detrained state, their potential to add muscle is pretty good. I would imagine that there's a considerable difference between people adding muscle they've previously had and people adding muscle for the first time.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I did notice actually an article about you. I think it was on the HIT Resurgence website actually, and it mentioned that you played basketball, but it didn't really say much about it. I play basketball as well. I still play like once a week, or I try to play at least once a week. Did you play professionally?
No, not at all. Not at all. I played. I just played at college at the University of Chester. And I played in sort of National League teams around the area, sort of North Wales at the time. I was all right, but I'm about 5'10", 5'11", and nothing exceptional in my game that was ever going to make me go pro.
Fair enough. But you've sorry, I'm digressing a little bit here. But are you since turned into your interest more into sort of endurance sports?
Yeah, I was a basketball coach for a long time, and that got me into coaching wheelchair basketball. And at the Paralympic Games, I met my fiancée, and she is an ex-GB heptathlete and is now an ex-GB triathlete as well. And it seems that when you spend enough time around triathletes, because she was sort of part of a club and so on, that you end up doing a lot of what they do, which was a lot of cycling and quite a few swimming events, and I even turned my hand to a couple of triathlons. I'm not interested in endurance sports. I find it quite boring, to be honest. I do like to get on the bike and do challenge myself in that way. But no, I'm not. I wouldn't consider myself an endurance athlete by any standard.
Fair enough. So tell me, what sports are you involved in, if any, at the moment?
Not really any at the moment, actually. I tend to think that sports are pretty bad for you, actually. I put my absence of any kind of niggly injuries down to the fact that I haven't really played sports competitively I did a couple of triathlons a couple of years back, and even then I was picking up sort of niggling little calf injuries. But prior to that, it was basketball, and I always had some sort of ankle sprain or some calf injury or a shoulder injury or something, and I don't get any of that anymore, and I'm pretty convinced that sports are generally bad for you, and exercise is generally good for you. So, yeah, maybe that raises some issues about our PE system in the UK, that we push kids into sport to be healthy, but actually probably all they're going to do is end up getting injured.
That's a very good point, actually. I didn't think about that, but I somewhat agree with you. But I also believe that ultimately you only live once, and if you really love a sport and you get so much enjoyment out of it, then I guess it's just assessing the risks.
I could not agree more. I think that everything we do in life is about doing what we want and about enjoyment. And I know that there are some high intensity training advocates who don't push it on other people, and I certainly don't push it on other people, because I want them to just enjoy what they do, and if they enjoy training the way they train or doing what they do, then let them do what they want.
Sure, that's good stuff. I just want to jump back at you for a second, because I actually wanted to talk to you about this Geek to Freak experiment, which I ended up doing myself. So basically what I did I was actually unemployed for a couple months between jobs. So I still work as a sort of sales executive for an IT firm. Okay. And I decided, right, I'm going to give this experiment a go, and I'm going to do it, to the letter. So I did the training sessions, and the way he does it is once you plateau on more than one of the exercises, you increase your recovery by 1 day. So, towards the end of it, your exercise sessions are quite far apart. And I was consuming an inordinate amount of food. Oh my God. I was having this shake, which was, I cut a long story short, it was, full of almond butter, milk, protein powder, bananas. It was about 1,000 calories. Wow. And then I was having 4 meals, which were, starch, animal protein, legumes and loads of vegetables. And then I was doing alpha lipoic acid, cissus quadrilangus before every meal, creatine and glutamine and all the rest of it. And I did this for about a month. I gained 12.6 pounds. However, so that's in someone who's trained, but I would say that probably half of that was body fat at least.
Okay.
So I was a bit annoyed because I'm like, oh, why do I have, I start blaming my genetics at that point. Because obviously what I wanted to see was a stone in muscle gained, not like half a stone in fat.
Right.
But hey, it was. I journaled the whole thing, how I felt every day, and it might make for a good blog post at some point. But my sort of conclusion from it is that it does work, but you can also get results in terms of muscle gain, perhaps over a longer period, but that is more convenient within your lifestyle. So, don't need to necessarily have, I don't know, whatever. I must have been having 5,000-6,000 calories a day,
Yeah.
And so I just wanted to share that.
No, I found that quite interesting, and I think we can become over consumed by these things. So we do, manipulate our diet or purchase expensive supplements and become so devoted to our training and schedule things in. I constantly talk to people and they ask me what my routine is, what my training routine is, and it's really quite ad hoc. It's quite, it's relatively routine now at the moment, but every few weeks it kind of changes with the way my work schedule sort of changes, if I've got a lot of marking or if I've got a lot more teaching or if I'm doing a lot more research. And I think that you just have to allow that to happen. I'm not the guy that is going to make my life fit around my training and my nutrition. So
I love that. That's just on that. Can you go through what your current sort of training regimen looks like?
Yeah, absolutely. I train twice a week at the moment, or it's normally twice a week, once midweek and once over a weekend. Mm-hmm. And somewhere in there, I probably do around about a 50 to 60 mile bike ride as well, which is normally on a weekend. So let's say a typical week is on a Saturday, I'll do a bike ride 50 or 60 miles. On a Sunday, I'll probably do compound movements that are geared around legs, chest, back. So chest press, pull down or row, leg press. I might throw in a couple of isolations there as well, in maybe pec fly, hip adductor, abductor, depending on how my legs are feeling from the previous day. And then midweek, I'm having a bit of fun with my workout right now. So my midweek workout on a Wednesday afternoon is dumbbell shoulder press, because I haven't trained with dumbbells for a long time, and now and then I like to go back and see what I can lift. Mm-hmm. So dumbbell shoulder press, and then I'm kind of isolating my arms into that workout. So bis, tris, isolated leg movements, so knee extension, leg curl, and lumbar extension as well. And if I throw in any other kind of core exercise, it's normally in that Wednesday workout, but occasionally on the Sunday.
Cool. Okay. How do you? I mean, I know. Well, I suppose like James, you have a really good knowledge of the body and the muscle groups and what's being trained when you do certain exercises. But how do you? I guess is it with that knowledge that you ensure that you don't overdo it? Because I'd be, being less knowledgeable than you, I'd be worried that I'd be infringing on my recovery ability if I was doing twice a week like that.
Mm-hmm. I tend to go with how I feel. I think that, some weeks come Wednesday, I don't feel great. I'll maybe feel fatigued. I mean, if you look at exercise as stress, then everything is stress. If I haven't slept well, or if I have, I don't know, money worries or work issues or anything like that, then that's stress, and that's going to affect your ability to respond to training. So, sure, some weeks you just ditch a training session and leave it a day, or leave it an extra couple of days and go for it.
So when you're
just training when you feel ready. I tend to kind of split my routine up a bit right now, because each workout is about 20 to 30 minutes at a max. And it just, I don't feel like it. I don't feel like I'm having any negative effects from training twice a week. and I'm, quite enjoying the workout that I'm doing. So, that's why I'm doing it, I guess.
Are you still progressing? Like, do you get stronger every week, or over a longer period, as we were talking about earlier?
I think what I tend to do is I tend to shake up the exercises I do every now and then. So, for example, we have a Med-X lumbar extension, which I used to train on routinely years back, and got to a point where I was, lifting quite a good weight on it, close to the stack.
Oh, wow.
And I went back to using it quite recently and was halfway down the stack instead. So I figured that I would start training on that again, and I've made good progress week after week, just from once a week training sessions on a Wednesday. So, for example, when you stop doing an exercise and then you start doing that exercise again, then I tend to see strength gains increase on that exercise. But as much of that might be the sort of the neural benefit of, or the neural adaptation of performing that exercise.
Sure.
I have a tendency to think that I've probably really plateaued with how much sort of muscle mass I'm going to carry, and how much strength I'm going to make. I don't know. I'm not as committed to it in counting everything that I do. I don't tend to track my workouts as religiously now as I once did, and I do them as much for the feeling of doing them, and for the health benefits that I get from them, and de-stressing and things like that. So I make steady progress on them at the moment, and when I stop making progress, I'll probably just move things around and go back to different exercises again, and look for progress on those exercises. So
just on that point, when you say we stop making progress, would you still take a view of a longer term though? Or would you, if after 1 week you saw, oh, hang on, I did 20 seconds less time under load in the same, and I'm pretty sure he's roughly around the same cadence, perhaps I should change things up? Or
I don't record time under load anymore. I've become a bit reckless with my journals. I don't practice what I preach to anything.
And I don't think that's a bad thing. Go on.
So I think that what I would tend to do is go with how I feel. If I went into the gym yesterday evening at around about 8 o'clock, and I lifted certain weights on the chest press machine. If I went in next week and I put the pin in the same place, and I didn't perform as many repetitions, or they didn't feel as comfortable, or I struggled, or I didn't feel like they were as good quality repetitions, then I might then have a tendency to go for another couple of weeks and see how I got on, or give myself more rest. But then if I didn't, then I would probably maybe vary things around. I think there are key exercises I keep in my weekly workout anyway at some point. I'm a guy, so I'm going to do bicep curls. I'm pretty happy with that. I'll admit to that. I'm always going to do a chest press. I think, I can't imagine ever going through a point in my life where I don't do a chest press once a week. I'm probably always going to do a set of pull-ups once a week. And I'm probably always going to do a leg press once a week. So at my most bare routine, it's probably going to be about 4 or 5 exercises once a week. And I've done a lot less than that. I've decreased my training to probably about once every 20 days or so, with just a handful of exercises, and still made good gains at the time. But I think that my main goal for my training is not to count the pounds that I lift or the pounds that I carry. Or the load the time that the load is in attention for, but to enjoy my workout and, like I said, get all the other gains that I get, the insulin sensitivity and the bone mineral density adaptations and the cancer fighting properties and everything else and so on. Yeah, that's a really good point you raise, because I remember James Steele was saying that, I think he mentioned a study that he did or read. I can't recall it quite from the conversation, and which proved that I think it was it proved that there was no such thing as a non-responder to resistance training. Everyone benefited in some way, even if it was something small, like, well, I say small, or something that's not as aesthetic, such as, like you say, insulin sensitivity or cholesterol ratios or whatever. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I found that really interesting. talk to me about nutrition. What do you think about nutrition? Do you think it's a one-size-fits-all?
I think the key thing with nutrition has got to be something that fits into your lifestyle. I know that I pretty much know what I should eat. I know what works well for my body. And I also know that, for example, yesterday was Mother's Day. So myself and my fiance and her sister went out for a meal with her family, with her mum and dad. And so we went for a big carvery. And, when they came around and it was a 3-course meal, when they came around and asked who wanted dessert, I had dessert. And I'm pretty confident there was no nutritional content to it. It was pretty high in sugar. So, but that's what fitted with my lifestyle at the time. I tend to, the best way to describe it is I tend to have about an 80-20 principle on eating well and eating what I want. Mm-hmm. Bad food generally tastes pretty good at times, and it's pretty convenient at times as well. So 20% of the time, if it slips a little bit into that realm, I'm not going to lose much sleep over it. 80% of the time, if it's pretty good, if it's good sources of protein, if it's good fiber content, good nutritional content as far as vegetables and fruits and things like that, then I'm pretty happy.
Cool. Can you give us like a snapshot, like what an average day looks like in terms of your diet?
Yeah, I'm pretty big on fasting, on intermittent fasting. So, for example, I don't very often have breakfast. So today I got up, I like to have a glass of water first thing in the morning. I tend to think that's a pretty good start. And normally it's about 20 to 30 minutes for a cup of coffee. And then I didn't have anything to eat until about 1 o'clock, maybe 1:30 this afternoon. Mm-hmm. And then I had a salad with some steak and some salami and some sort of spiced meats and things like that in it. It was spinach and peppers and olives and all that good stuff. Mm-hmm. Probably about 4 o'clock this afternoon, I was getting pretty peckish, had another cup of coffee around then and had a protein bar with it. And then got in from work this evening. I've had a couple of pieces of fruit today, a couple of apples and a banana as well. And I'll probably, when we get done with this interview, I'll probably go and cook some chicken and have a salad and maybe cook up some vegetables, some broccoli as well, things like that. It tends to be relatively low carb, especially Monday to Friday. But I don't really count that. I think it's low carb as far as there's not a huge amount of rice, pasta, bread, but it's good content of vegetables and fruits and things like that.
Cool. Talk just on intermittent fasting. I appreciate that it's been shown that you don't lose muscle when you do intermittent fasting, but it scares the shit out of me because I've done it before. I did the bulletproof intermittent fasting, Dave Asprey's thing, diet. Yeah. So I did the bulletproof coffee and kind of the bulletproof diet for a couple of weeks. And I withered down, like I lost muscle mass. At least I'm convinced I did. Perhaps it's just in my head. I don't know really. But I felt that maybe because the overall the overall number of calories consumed had decreased because of the fasting, that I actually ended up losing muscle mass, and that concerns me. So what are your views on the benefits of intermittent fasting and how to use it so that you don't lose muscle mass?
So I probably do intermittent fasting from around about 8 o'clock in the evening, or probably a bit later than that, maybe 9 o'clock in the evening till maybe normally around about midday the next day. So it's probably not much more than 14 hours.
Is this on a daily basis? Is that every single day you do that?
No, it's probably Monday to Friday more so. Over a weekend, I'll probably eat later into the evening, and I'll probably get up and eat what I want when I want. And I'm more prone to being around people who have breakfast on a weekend, at which point I'll just have breakfast as well. I tend to, if I'm honest, I don't tend to feel hungry when I wake up in the morning, which is the main reason that I tend to miss breakfast. So it's just what's tended to work well for my own sort of well-being and my own sort of comfort. I think that, there's some good evidence out there that sort of suggests that if you skip breakfast, you're not going to reduce your calorie intake by much. And most people, they tend to say that people who are trying to lose weight shouldn't miss breakfast, because it will only make them hungry later on in the day, and they'll then overeat through the rest of the day. So I don't necessarily think that I overeat through the rest of the day. I think that, I tend to go by how I feel. I tend to eat when I'm hungry. I don't like the idea that people say, oh, you should eat every 3 or 4 hours and so on. Our meal times are pretty predetermined by society. We work a full day, and it's pretty logical that we would eat before we start the working day, and eat at the end of the working day, and have a bit of time in the middle to eat again. I can't imagine. I'm not hugely into Paleolithic or hunter-gatherer lifestyles. I think there's a lot we can learn from it, but I think that as a being, our body is kind of going to tell us the things we want, and I think that we should sort of eat when we're hungry, and that will give us a pretty good idea of what we should eat and how much we should eat and so on.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. I think you've got it spot on. Okay, cool. So just I'm interested because I know you've got quite a bit of your background is in performance in sport and how to improve performance. And I just wondered, and actually I'm really, because you've got a basketball background, I'm really interested to hear what you have to say about this. But what is the best way to train what is the best way to train to improve performance in sports?
The best way to improve, I'm gonna stick my neck out now, and I'm gonna give a straight answer to that. Yes. I think the best way to improve your performance in a sport is to play that sport. I think anything else is adjunct to it. It might improve your resilience against injury. It might enhance performance marginally, but I think that if you want to be a basketball player, the best thing to do is play basketball. If you want to be a football player, the best thing to do is play football. As strong and as athletic as I might still be in my mid-30s now, I will never be a football player, and the prime reason for that is because I've never really cared to play football. I'm stronger than most footballers I know. I talked about my cycling before, and I'm probably as fit as most footballers in VO2 max testing, which I've obviously done a lot of, having been in the labs.
But which is very specific, though, right?
Sorry?
VO2 max.
Yeah, so it's specific to whatever modality you're doing. If you do it on a bike or if you do it on a treadmill, I've done it on both. I've done it on a kayak ergometer as well, and I tend to rank reasonably well on VO2 max, both on running and on cycling.
What is your VO2 max?
Sorry,
what is your VO2 max? Is it it's a number, isn't it?
Yeah.
The way you measure
so VO2 max is the maximum volume of oxygen that you can take up and your body can use, and it's generally measured by the amount of oxygen and carbon dioxide that you expire. So for most team sports athletes, it's probably somewhere in the high 40s to low 60s, depending on whether it's sort of rugby at the lower end of that and football at the higher end of that. I think Floyd Landis had a VO2 max of about 80 something. Which was higher than sort of Lance Armstrong's, and elite endurance cyclists are pretty high up there. Cross-country skiers are pretty high up there in the high 60s, 70s, maybe just into the 80s. Paula Radcliffe was up in the 70s, but she had a very high lactate threshold. So it wasn't necessarily that her VO2 max was particularly good, it's that she could still buffer lactate at a very high intensity of exercise.
Are we talking about the pyruvate that goes into the mitochondria in the cell? Is that tied to that, or am I thinking about this in the wrong way?
Yeah, pretty much. What's going to happen is beyond a certain intensity of exercise, your body's going to start to accumulate lactate, and what you're looking for in a lactate curve is to see sort of that accumulation occur at a higher intensity of exercise. So, for example, Paul Radcliffe could run at about 18 kilometers per hour, and she was still below lactate threshold. So she wasn't really incurring a fatigue to it. She was still able to sustain that pace, which is tremendous for marathon runners and people like that. So I mean, from a physiological point of view, I'm probably not a million miles away from some pretty good athletes, but the determining factor is my skill, ability or inability to play that sport. So I think the best way to improve sports performance is to do that sport.
That's awesome answer. So I was thinking about this because in relation to basketball, even though I I have a pretty busy corporate life, and obviously I'm running the Corporate Warrior business, podcast, etc. I still want to be able to play these sports and get better at them when I can.
Yeah.
Basketball being the main one. And I thought about this, and I think it was James who said that, you know, it's best to be. Is it James? I can't remember now. But it's best to be, if you're gonna, let's say you can't play in a competitive environment, which I think you say, you know, it's probably the perfect environment to get better at a sport is in the actual game environment that you'd be in. But rather another way is to break down the movements and skills that you do within the sport into a drill fashion, but only do them when you're well rested, and then don't do them when you're exhausted, because that might befuddle the correct me if I'm wrong, but like the neurological pathways that you're building. Could you elaborate on that?
Yeah. There's a lot of truth to what you just said. So I used to really preach that you reinforce a skill. I mean, from a neural point of view, everything we do has a skill component to it, whether it's lifting a weight, whether it's, you know, brushing your teeth or writing a letter, you know, or an email, I suppose I should say. You know, that's why we don't brush our teeth. I mean, I'm right-handed, and if I tried to brush my teeth with my left hand, it would be pretty gross. So, you know, we've acquired that skill. It's a technique. It's a neural component to it. It's why, you know, you can shoot free throws with your dominant hand and not with your other hand. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, I think there's a lot to be said for training a skill when you're not fatigued, because if you're fatigued, then you'll kind of cheat the skill. If you can imagine trying to shoot a free throw when you're exhausted, you might manipulate the skill to incorporate more leg bend or more hip extension or more shoulder extension, to try and put a higher trajectory on the ball or things like that. So, but when you're fresh, you'll reinforce a good skill, you'll rehearse a good skill, and you know, insulate that technique with myelin sheaths and so on. If you get into the neurophysiology aspect of it, then you know, there's some really good textbooks out there that look at that, and myelin is kind of the big selling point on insulating kind of skill acquisition.
Which books are those?
Sort of lay books around that area. There's a book called Bounce. I'm trying to think who the author was. I want to say it was a guy called something like Matthew Syed, maybe. There's a book called The Talent Code by Dan Coyle. He talked a little bit about it.
I've heard about that one. Okay.
They kind of debate this idea of 10,000 hours of practice versus, you know, nature versus nurture. Mm-hmm. And from there, you can get into some real kind of hardcore textbooks if you're really into it, which off the top of my head, Motor Control is normally, I think, a couple of guys, Schmidt and Risberg, are the key guys in Motor Control textbooks. Which falls under sports psychology rather than physiology, interestingly. But I think that, you know, skill components are what determines sports performance and skill acquisition and things like that. And I would agree that if you can't perform, well, I wouldn't necessarily, if you can't perform the sport, if you don't have time to perform the sport, break it down into components. I would say perform the sport or don't perform the sport, but train the muscles any way you want, because don't try to replicate the sport in the way you train the muscles. You know, don't practice free throw shooting with a medicine ball, because you'll just mess up your free throws.
Or what about this then? What if you did strength training for physical conditioning, and then you did your skill training? Wouldn't because ultimately you're still doing a skill training when you're doing resistance training, are you not befuddling that skill, that sports skill, when you're strength training?
There's an argument for that. And this is, I guess, what sort of football coaches have said for a long time, that you'll make people bigger and clumsier and so on and so forth, or soccer coaches, I should say. I think the best way to think of it is that if you think of neural pathways as being like electricity going through sort of electric pylons, and the end point is a certain pylon or a certain house, well, if you do something that's completely different, then the electric impulse is going in a completely different direction. So it's never really going to get confused. If I do a bench press, it's never going to be, you know, my body's never going to be confused between bench pressing and free throw shooting.
Right. Okay.
Whereas if I do free throw shooting with a medicine ball, then I'm kind of going in the same direction, but not quite getting to the same place. So I'm kind of trying. I'm more likely to almost sort of confuse my body with that process, and fire the neural pathways that are similar, or some of that are the same, but some that are slightly different in their recruitment patterns, and ultimately, hinder the skill acquisition of the free throw shooting.
That's an awesome analogy. Is there evidence behind that?
Yeah, there's some pretty good evidence behind that. For example, if you look at sort of weighted baseball swings, and the same sort of goes for sprinting. The evidence around sort of resisted sprinting or weighted swinging of a baseball bat goes to show that while you're increasing the amount of force you can produce when you're running or when you're swinging a bat, you're also practicing swinging the bat slower or running slower. So the biomechanical elements will change in accordance with the force. So yeah, the force will go up, but the biomechanical elements will come down. You'll decrease stride length. You'll probably change the stride frequency, and you'll learn to swing a baseball bat slower. If you invert that and say over speed training, where somebody makes you run faster or somebody makes you swing a baseball bat quicker, then you will improve the speed component on both elements, but you'll probably decrease the force component because you're not practicing swinging the bat, at the right weight or running with the same force production, which is why I would always come back to, if you're a sprinter, then sprint with your body weight and strength train the muscles to get stronger. And if you're a baseball player, then swing the baseball bat you're going to swing, but strength train the muscles you're going to use to get stronger.
Yeah.
So, and there's some good evidence around that in motor control. Most strength and conditioning coaches would run away from it, hide it, or ignore it. By my experience, but then that's up to them.
That's the coaching folklore that I think Doug McGuff mentioned in a 21 convention, which you're sort of addressing slightly there. Yeah, cool. Going to be really selfish now, but my question to you is, based on what you've been saying, if I wanted to create a very efficient and effective basketball training program, would it be, let's say, if I didn't have the opportunity to play in a competitive game, let's say right hand layups at game intensity, maybe 50 repetitions of those, and then a rest till I get I'm recovered fully pretty much, and then go straight into jump shots, game intensity, and then break down all the skills, but have rest in between them so that I'm doing them in a rested state. Did you think that would be a good way of improving at the sport of basketball, or any sport for that matter?
If I look at something like basketball, if I ever go and shoot around a basketball, one of the things that I like to do is I like to run full court for layups. So you say about sort of 50 right hand layups.
That'd be like full court running.
Yeah, but I think that replicates what you're going to do on a basketball court. You're going to run a lot, and then you're going to lay up. You're not just going to kind of come from the free throw line, 3-point line, or halfway line. You're going to run the length of the court and then have to do a layup, or you're going to get a pass after having run, some component of it. So you're going to get that aerobic training component as well. I would incorporate jumping drills into basketball. So, tip drills, things like that. The basketball players have a tendency to do a really good. People think that I'm dead set against things like plyometrics with my training philosophy, and I'm not. I'm for plyometrics in the right component. So if you're a basketball player, your plyometrics exists on a basketball court. It doesn't exist in the gym.
Right.
So I would do tip drills. I would do, other things like that. I would do free throws. I would probably do 20 layups, full court, end to end, right hand, one end, left hand at the other, something like that. And then I would stop and take 10 free throws while you're in a state of aerobic fatigue, not in a state of muscular fatigue. Your shoulder. I wouldn't tell you to do shoulder press and then take free throws because your shoulders are fatigued. But if you just run up and down the court, then you're going to be in a state of aerobic fatigue when you take those free throws. So I think there's a difference in sort of the way we should approach this. And I do think that taking, specific skill components of a sport should be performed when you're fresh. But if you're going to perform them in a competitive environment, you're gonna take those free throws with the game on the line, and you're not going to be fresh.
Yeah.
You're going to be in a state of fatigue. So, but you're probably not going to be in a state of muscular fatigue. You're going to be in a state of aerobic fatigue.
Yeah. When you say aerobic fatigue, though, is that not? I get a bit confused because obviously, like the whole, anaerobic and aerobic being this, that within the same process, you can't really separate the two. So, how do you define aerobic fatigue?
I guess, that's a really good question. I probably dug myself a bit of a hole there. I guess what I mean is that you're not going to fatigue the specific muscles to take that skill. So
I see.
So like I said, you're not going to you haven't by running you're not going to fatigue your shoulders to then take a free throw, but you're going to be a bit more out of breath. So you're going to be in a bit more of an oxygen debt, and so on.
Okay.
So, it's, wow, I really have dug myself a hole there.
No, it's cool. It's just, I'm just really intrigued. So I like asking the difficult questions.
No, I think you raised some really good questions. So well done. Thanks for that.
And just for those listening, I think it's really important to, take James' advice here in that these tenets can be transferred to any sport. So if you are trying to be the best you can at your sport, then that's the way to do it. Cool. Okay, so just a couple more questions, and I'll let you go and have your chicken because I'm also pretty hungry. So here's an interesting thing. So I played basketball the other day for the first time in ages, and despite I can finish a big five now and feel barely any delayed onset muscle soreness on the days that follow, right? But I do a basketball session after not being played for several months, and I'll feel soreness, especially in my rhomboids. I think it's my rhomboids, like my upper middle back, and in my triceps, certainly in my right arm where I'm shooting the ball. But I'm thinking, why am I getting soreness from that? Because biologically, that confuses me.
Well, you've put tension through muscles in different ways and in a different type of contraction, different frequency of contractions. I think the body, makes adaptations to whatever we do. So if you do a big 5 workout for a start, the way you train the muscles used in those 5 exercises, your body will adapt to. So you will, after a period, you'll stop getting any delayed onset muscle soreness, and your body will probably look at those exercises and to some extent almost kind of go, we know what we're doing here. I can take it from here. And there's probably less kind of thought process in the workout, if that makes sense. If you then went kayaking, then, albeit that you might be using the same muscles, you're using them at maybe a higher frequency of contraction, a higher contraction rate, a higher number of contractions per minute, that kind of thing, probably a higher number of total contractions, and so on. And this is where there could be some argument for changing the load we lift and the repetition duration. So, one day going and doing a 4-2-4 session, 4-second concentric, 2-second pause, 4-second eccentric. Another day doing a 10-second concentric, 10-second eccentric, and varying the exercises we do to avoid, becoming too comfortable almost. Sure enough, you can train your legs to a point where your legs are in great condition, but if you get on a bike and cycle 50 miles, you'll feel different muscles going crazy. Your adductors maybe, or your glutes or hamstrings or even your calves. So, you're just challenging your body in a different way, and it's just different firing patterns. By my understanding of it, this is getting a bit more cellular than my expertise.
Okay,
I guess.
Cool. So, do you think also that even if you do something that is perhaps steady state, like cycling or jogging, and you're not used to it, that because it's still causing some type of muscular trauma, and that's what's causing that soreness as well as the firing patterns? Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, of course.
Okay, cool. I have to ask, what are you holding in your LinkedIn picture? It's some sort of trophy.
In my link, I can't even think what I've got on my LinkedIn. it's potentially.
It's at some big shows. It looks like.
Is it like a lion's head with flames? Yeah. So I was part of the 2012 Paralympic Games, London Paralympic Games, with Great Britain wheelchair basketball. And one of the events that we had in the run-up to it was a big event in London where we all got our kind of tailor-made suits and a lot of the gear. And part of that was a big banquet with all the athletes and all the coaches and so on. And the table decoration was a lion's head with the flames coming away from it. So it looks like an award. It's not an award at all. I think after a couple of beers, I sort of held it aloft my head, or I held it and smiled for a couple of photos as if I just accepted it as an award.
Brilliant. No, I discovered that during my intense stalking of you online to try and prepare for this interview.
There you go.
So cool. Okay, so just to finish up, I'd really like to know, I guess, your favorite resources when it comes to health and fitness. So do you have any books that come to mind that you recommend to others, or that you think are the best books for people who want to improve their knowledge on the subjects we discussed today?
I think Luke Carlson asked me if I was going to recommend one sort of exercise book to anybody, what would it be? And I said that I would probably suggest either Body by Science by Doug McGuff or The New High Intensity Training by Ellington Darden.
Oh, I have.
I think they're both pretty good texts. I would, of course, rather people go and read my evidence-based resistance training recommendations from 2011, but I appreciate that didn't get the same publicity. I think anything by those guys is pretty good for kind of an evidence-based approach to training. From a nutritional point of view, I just finished reading, I think it was called Fat Chance by Robert Lustig, Dr. Robert Lustig.
Oh yeah.
And I thought that was a really good book. It was a lot more. I don't know the best way to say it. I just thought it was very diplomatic in its kind of construct. Mm-hmm. I thought it was going to be more anti-carb than it was. It's very much against sugar, and the sugar being put in food that we see and we experience. Mm-hmm. But it's very pro high fiber diets and things like that, and it gives some really good examples and again gives research. I think the main thing I would draw people towards is anything that's got a reference to it. Once books have started getting a reference list in them, you know, there's at least some evidence to go with the claims within the book.
Interesting. Just on that, so probably a few months ago now, I read the Bulletproof Diet by Dave Asprey. Have you read that?
I haven't read it, but I've heard a lot of good things about it.
Okay.
Or I've heard a lot of things about it, and I've heard a lot of good things about it as well.
No, I know. It's full of studies from PubMed to back up what he's saying. Now, I think Dave Asprey gets a lot of flack because he is a fantastic marketer, and you know, people immediately think he's a scam artist or the next snake oil salesman. And so I sometimes I get a little bit confused because I'm like, you know, he has a bias. I mean, he's defending a narrative. He's got a whole business behind this. So do I trust what he says? And can I be asked to go through all of the data? No. So it's sometimes a little bit like, so kind of what I resort to is I do it on myself. If I feel it works, if I feel good for it, then that's good enough for me. Based on obviously I have to see some scientific evidence as well. But very much kind of experiment on myself is, I think, a good way to, good advice to people, perhaps.
I think that's the key. I think that's the key that everybody has to do, has to take on board. You know, all these diets, South Beach diets, low carb diet, paleo, whatever else it might be. You know, people need to look at it and try it, and they need to give it a fair and an honest trial. And at that point, they can then decide whether it works for them or doesn't work for them and their own experiences and so on. And I think that's by far the best approach to nutrition or exercise or lifestyle, things like that.
And just for the record, Dave, if you're listening, I think you're great. So don't get offended by what I just said, because I do want to get you on the show at some point. Anyway, so, okay, cool. That's brilliant. Thank you for contributing those. James, what's the best way for people to get hold of you and contact you?
People can just send me a straight... Yeah, people can send me a straight email on james.fisher@solent.ac.uk. I'm pretty open to receiving emails from people I've never met before, asking about exercise or things like that. So, yeah, feel free to send across an email or anything like that. Awesome. I am on Twitter. I am on LinkedIn. I don't tend to use social media that much. So if you tweet me and I don't get back to you for about 3 weeks, then don't take it the wrong way.
That's good stuff. All of that will obviously be in the show notes so that people can see that and contact you with questions and stuff.
Yeah, no problem.
Awesome. James, thank you so much for your time this evening. I really enjoyed this conversation and I learned a lot. So I'm excited to put some of this stuff into practice.
Thanks very much, Lawrence. Cool. I appreciate it. Thank you.
No worries. This will be up soon and perhaps we'll do a part 2 in the future. And all the best.
Absolutely. And to you. Take care.
Thanks, James. Cheers. Bye.
Bye-bye. Bye.